Hello, good afternoon, good morning to all. Welcome back to the Performance Paradox. You're probably wondering who I am and why your normal host, Chris Hamley, isn't staring at you and talking right now. But I'm Pete Allen. I'm also part of the Brecham Group. And the snowstorms continue to cause havoc for us. As you remember, our last show, our guest got caught in a snowstorm and was unable to make it. And today, Chris is in unknown parts. He's actually here with us, but not on camera. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jason Freed and Andy Smith back to the roundtable, if you will, and welcome Chris Hamley back as your host. But interesting enough, we're here to talk about why do people hate change? And this is a change to the opening of our show. So we'll talk about that maybe a little later.
Chris, I feel uncomfortable. I don't know what to do.
So Pete's being very, very nice, actually. He's blaming it on the snowstorm. Reality is I got voted off as the least attractive of the group, so they said no more summer for you, but so such is the life. No, I appreciate everybody joining today. We want to talk about change and why people are resistant to it. And really, as part of the performance paradox, one of the things we run into a ton is that people talk about wanting to change, but in reality, they don't always want to. And there's some reasons for that and some logic and approaches to how to go about changing people's attitude about that. And that's really what we kind of focus on today and talk about some of our experiences. It goes back to the old adage that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And there's very much that in any types of change management is how do you get them to a point where they want to drink the water? So with that, I'd love to hear from the guys. So tell us, why do you guys think that people are resistant to change?
Well, speaking of drinking, I'll go first, I guess. But one thing, it's a lot of times they don't know that they need to change, right? There's a lot of folks out there, and we go to a lot of DCs and such that they're highest performing in their company or in their area, and they're like, hey, I'm the best performing, why do I need to change? Well, just because you're best with relation to your general, your unique population doesn't mean you're really the best, and everybody can always get better and that kind of thing. So one, it's just the awareness of why do I need to change?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the whole compared to what, right, Jason? It's like, if I'm compared to my peers and my peers are simply the guys I work with, then I might look like I'm the biggest guy on campus. But when you look across industries, across competitors with similar processes, and often, you can learn that maybe you're not the best, right?
Right.
I think it's even maybe a little more basic than that at times, right? Change is hard. Nobody likes to do something different, right? I mean, half my career I spent running teams of engineers who were in charge of driving changes for organizations. But the group of people that hated change most were the engineers, right? They had routines, they had thought processes, and trying to get them to break out of those things was painful for no other reason than it was different, right? And it's hard to adopt. I mean, you think about all the industries out there around helping people change, and how they try to make change easy. And ultimately, that's what we're talking about is how do you make change easier for people, right? Asking them to do something different is hard.
Sure.
So, Go ahead.
Well, I mean, for me, it's around kind of the alignment of incentives, right? Are you measuring the right kind of behaviors? And going back to the sales side of things, it's a situation where I heard it early and often when I worked with the sales teams in previous lives. Tell me how I'm going to be measured, and I'll tell you how I'm going to behave. And so similarly, if a DC manager is responsible for a budget or responsible for a performance set, which includes financial performance, and he's quote unquote meeting his budget, then there's really no incentive to change. So the trick, of course, is realigning those incentives.
Yeah. I mean that's it, right? They don't feel the pain of the poor performance.
Right.
One of the things we always talk about is kind of metrics and how do you measure your success or not. And to that point, if if I don't feel the pain, if it's not difficult for me, if it doesn't make my job harder or my life harder, if I'm not getting compensated to do things differently, all those things just make me continue the way I was doing because I'm happy, right? And it's easy.
Sure.
And we have to recognize as change agents, kind of how do you change that culture, right? How do you change those mindsets? What else? So other than just, I'll call it misaligned performance metrics, what are some other things that make people resistant to change?
Yeah, I think some of it is also, we've been to clients that they're getting beat up so often by senior management and the upper levels on a specific performance piece that if you're trying to go and change anything, they're so gun shy about it and so scared about doing anything that they're not going to change. We've been places, large companies, multi-million-dollar companies, and again, they get beat up on service so bad that we go in for a project, they want the absolute final answer with 100% guarantee before they even try to dip their toe in the water. And everybody knows that's never going to be the case. So, that just because of the behaviors that they're dealt, getting beaten down every time there's a sort of lag in service metric or whatever it is, they're not going to go along with you.
Yeah, and Chris, you touched on it, right? You mentioned culture earlier. Is the culture one of consequence or is it one of contribution, right? So, I think about it this way. The answer, so if you were to write it all down, it reads exactly the same way, but it's about how you hear it, and is the response to change or I'll say the response, I know, right? Versus I know, right? I mean, it's the exact same words, but are they excited about it or not? And it comes down to, are you going to be held accountable? The beatings will continue until morale improves versus simply celebrating the opportunity to make things better.
So, hey, let's throw a question out to all of our participants there. And, from your perspective, has anybody else ever come across something that was preventing people to want to change? Would love to hear some comments from you guys. So please do so. I think the culture of the organization and that fear of change ultimately is what it is, right? Honestly, there's a little bit of how bad could things get kind of perspective, right? Which is, boy, if I change this, that will happen, or the other thing will happen. And I've always said that everybody can find a reason not to change, not to do something different, right. But you just need one reason to do it differently ultimately, right? So how do you go out and find that one reason that motivates everybody? Again, going back to alignment, going back to that removal of fear, but ultimately, how do you create an environment where they see that one thing is beneficial for you, right, or for them? I guess.
I think if you, and just going down that road. So, I've pulled the fear out. I've created the new metric basis or however we're going to measure it so we know what we're doing. But even just starting with simple things to get the buy-in on the floor of, hey, you've been doing this for 20 years. What do you hate the most about what you have to do with this every day? Everybody's got the one thing. Everybody knows, like, man, this is painful. Why do I have to do this? But I do, because that's what it is. So, I mean, even if you can start with something simple like removing that, and at least get them to feel a little bit of momentum going forward, that's always a big plus too. Yeah,
I think it's as much about creating that I'll say safe space, if you will. I mean, so often when we get brought in, it's a situation where senior leadership has had their inciting event, whether it's it could be some sort of incident, it could be a slip in performance, it could be expectations at a shareholder level, right? Saying we need to lower our total supply chain costs, go get me some bips. But at the end of the day, if your boss's boss has brought us in and then they want us to try something new, then that's kind of the universal get out of jail free card, meaning you're being tasked to accomplish something new, and you have permission to go do it. Now, we'll set up guardrails. We're going to act like grown-ups. We're going to go ahead and communicate exceptions. But at the end of the day, if you fail to achieve something, or if service slips, or if something else kind of backs out, that if that was anticipated and part of a plan, that it just becomes confirmation that we're on the right path rather than a reason to slow down or a reason to revert. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, just for some housekeeping here. So we're having some technical issues, guys. So we're not seeing comments. So we appreciate everybody who is commenting for us, but we're not getting them at the moment. So somebody's going to be gracious enough to feed those to us here in a minute. And we're grateful.
We're doing pretty well.
Chris, if you want a couple of them, I'm actually monitoring them online. So Adam Keynes from AGCO reached out and said, he made an interesting comment, kind of along the lines of what we're talking about. It says, they don't know what they don't know. We know it's not working, but don't know how to make it better, right? So I think that's kind of along the lines of some of the comments here. And maybe you guys could maybe filter in some stories around that and amplify that a bit.
Yeah, one thing that I've done a couple times in the past is, so there's a lot of that. I've grown up in this DC or this warehouse, and this is all I know. And if you can reach out to some of your contacts and take them on facility tours or site tours of just other places so they can see what is in the realm of possibility. It's a super easy thing to do, but then they can see it and like, oh, okay. I don't have to use this piece of paper to pick and walk around with my shopping cart or whatever. There are some other things that can be done. Yeah. And people have solved it. So, I think that's a quick and easy one to get that. Now I realize what I don't know.
Yeah. I think, one other thing too that we haven't touched on yet is the idea that it wasn't created here. So oftentimes when we come in and talk to people about change and doing something different, there's always some natural resistance because it wasn't their idea, right? And what's happening is that they're looking for that to fail. They're trying to figure out why that's not going to work, just because it was a pride of ownership. And you take somebody who's been working in a role for a long time, they pride themselves on being good at it. You can absolutely understand how that happens, right? But at the same time, tying into that educational comment, it's that I have to understand what the possible might be, right? And thinking about how I could be doing things better or differently, right? Rather than that mindset of, oh, this is what I know, and it wasn't my idea. So I guess some questions. So we appreciate Adam's comment. Adam's a friend of the family, if you will. He worked with us a long time ago, so good to see him again. Yes, Rob, best of luck in Lebanon. Seems like you guys may have had a rough go the past few days. Let's see. What else do we have in there?
Calgary.
Eileen from Calgary. Thanks for tuning in north of the border.
Yeah. So let's shift gears a bit. And so we've kind of hit, I think, 4 or 5 topics. And maybe just to summarize there, it's a lack of understanding what the possible might be is one reason people are resistant to change. Wasn't their idea. Just the fear of change, right? What happens if, right? Other metrics, or it doesn't work, all those reasons, right? And then maybe the fourth one was just change is hard, right? It means I have to do something different, and people don't always like that, right? So with those kind of as the backdrop, what are things that you see people doing to overcome that? How can we soften people to the experience of going through change to help them get there? But what are some things you guys have seen?
Yes, I guess to start down the list. So one, the metrics, let's talk about that piece for a second. And it's not just I'm picking specific metrics that either, I may or may not be measuring these already, but it's also about getting the right metrics, but also managing the glide path. And we talk about that a lot on our projects, which is we know it's not going to instantly be better. Right. So we have to set the expectation of it might get worse. So, in any savings glide path is typically we have a projected go live of this date for the change. The first week or two, maybe we're only running at 60% or 70% of the expected metric. And as we get better and get through that learning curve, that goes up. So it helps set the proper expectations so you don't have the senior managers or others that come in day 3 and say, the numbers are bad. What are we doing? It's like, right. Relax a little bit. It will get there. And I say that jokingly, but not jokingly, because that happens to us a lot. It's, where are our numbers at? Okay, well, let's go back and remember our glide path. We're right where we're supposed to be. Right. So yeah, just kind of starting that, and even, whether it's some consultants coming in or even your own internal engineers or that kind of stuff, there is some level of selling the operation on, hey, this is a no-lose situation for you, right? If it goes well, you get all the credit, you're driving forward, things are great. If it goes bad, those daggum engineers or those daggum consultants, they messed it up. So trying to help use that to take some of the fear out of it as well.
And not to interrupt here, but just to be clear, you just said dadgum, right?
Yeah, twice actually. and you can ask my kids about that. They all have a dadgum kids story. So
yeah, there you go. Awesome. So you think about that. You made the comment that whoever's going through the change has the opportunity really to be the hero because it worked, right? But really doesn't have a lot of risk. And that's absolutely true in some cases, right? Particularly like where an outside person, wherever they're from, comes in and tries to impart change on somebody, right? There's that kind of feeling, and there's some absolute truth to that, which is we in our world of consulting, we don't stick around to reap all the benefits of the changes we go through, right? We don't get credit for those things. We get credit for the idea and then we go away. But really the victor in that is whoever's performing better ultimately. And yeah, to your point, Jason, in our environment, if it doesn't go well, they don't get blamed, we get blamed, which is what we signed up for, right? That's why we do what we do. But think about it in context of just in your personal everyday life, right? There is absolutely risk to change. But at the end of the day, you wouldn't have started thinking about changing if you hadn't seen the need, right? People don't voluntarily just go out and do things different tomorrow because I was bored, right? Well, sometimes, but generally not. Right. Most of the time it is that they felt a pain point. There was something that did that. So if you think about that pain point, what do good organizations do to kind of make people feel the repercussions of bad processes or what the areas that need to change?
Yeah, on one thing, again, we've talked about metrics several times, but let's give them a new target, right? Yeah. It's again, goes back to we're hitting our numbers. Why do we need to change? Or as happens 80% of the time with a lot of the warehouses and stuff we go into, everybody does that. My budget this year is 3% less than that last year. I'm hitting my budget, so why do I need to change? Well, if we go in and decide, all right, here's how we're going to make it go. We're going to increase the target for our metric, whatever the metric might be, or bring in a new metric. So instead of, years back, it was just on-time shipments as a metric. Then it's on time in full. You brought in the full ODIF, and then it's like, okay, now that changed the game plan for a lot of folks.
Well, I think, Andy, I'm sure you've got a story about a client who don't have a good baseline they're comparing to. like budgets or something, historic budgets, those kind of things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's instances where the budget might have been created against a set of assumptions, and those assumptions aren't true. But so there was this implication that it was either going to be a great deal of sales or not. And if the sales didn't come, but now I've basically just got a labor line, and now I'm just budgeting or I'm managing to a labor line that implied in that labor line was some performance against sales that didn't come. They're just managing the labor, and so the projection isn't true, but the budget stays because that's just the budget they have, right? And so they press ahead with very little incentive to address the performance gap, because as they look at their labor as just gross dollars, they're fine. In fact, they're below budget. Well, they're below budget because they're below budget by 3% because they took a 12% haircut in sales or something like that, and so they're probably they're probably not where they need to be anyway. They should probably be 12% lower, right? But they've got their legacy budget in place, and I've seen that on occasion for sure. And so often, the budget is the budget, and so I've put my plan together, and
also you use the word haircut.
Yeah,
I mean, not say anything about who's on the camera.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Sometimes they happen. Sometimes it's just not necessary.
I was reading a comment from Sylvester here, and it made me think about culture, right? And change. There's a lot of ways we can impact change in an operation, right? And some cultures are more open to that. And Sylvester made a comment of the fear of being seen as a worker or working against rules, right? So he's saying, hey, I don't want to be seen as the guy who tried to go out there and change something. That's a cultural phenomenon. How do you guys think about in engagements you've had or stories you might have as it relates this to culture and what you can do to change culture to foster change and improvement?
Yeah, one big thing comes to mind. So we talk on some of our changes and everything also about having a great communication plan. Well, that communication plan includes proper meetings, making sure we have all the correct interactions day to day. And that's one where as you start working on that culture by propping up those folks that are pushing the change, in that group setting, like, hey, Andy, great job. You looked at this receiving process different. Now what we're unloading, not only are we hitting our productivity goals and unloading, but our error rate has gone way down and that kind of stuff. And, you're right, Pete, and Sylvester too. Thanks for the comment. It's, you have those organizations where it's like, hey man, slow down, quit working so hard. We gotta do all this stuff. But, if everybody wants to get that praise, whether they admit it or not, so that can be a quick and easy way to start driving that culture to change that way. Is, give them no props, as the kids say.
Yeah, I think active listening with teammates is incredibly important. A process to sort of understand, and then frankly some sort of incentive, whether it's some kind of pizza party or gift card to wherever, right? Or it could be some sort of not kickback, but something tied to the percentage of savings, right? So something that scales. You make a big recommendation and a big impact, and that might be worth more so obviously worth more to the organization. Could it possibly be worth more to the teammate? That gets a little slippery, but at the end of the day, this again goes back to the alignment of incentives, right? If I see something that could be made better, listen and maybe it will get better, right?
Yep. I think I don't disagree with any of that, right? But I would say this, that more often changes are not maybe institutional projects, right?
Yeah.
More often they're not. They're more tactical and they're more basic. Hey, go do these things differently kind of approach the world, right? And as such, oftentimes that culture or that willingness to change starts with a leader. It starts with somebody who says, you know what, this is the right thing to go do, and we need to get better. I've told the story probably a million times at this point around suck less, right? What that means to us. And really it started with the idea of me just challenging a group of people to go do something different, to get a different result, and giving them the freedom to go do that. And more importantly, the freedom, giving them the expectation that they have to go change something. I don't care at that point, I didn't care what it was, just do something different, right? And I think it takes somebody who makes it okay. So that starts with the leader of that group or that organization or whatever level we're talking about to say, you know what, go do something. I'm giving you the power to go do something different to change the result. Now, there's expectations on the back of that. We have to ask, did it work? Right? Change just for the sake of change doesn't make any difference, right? Why are we wasting our time? Change for the sake of getting better. But to do that, you've got to make it okay. And somebody has to be that catalyst. And it doesn't have to always be the same person, but it does need to be somebody. I've always said in my career personally, people work inside boxes. Here's the box, going back to the rule following comment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That people very often work within the box that they believe they've been given. Me personally, I was always too stupid to realize there was a box, right? It wasn't that I ever meant to go change things. It's like I just didn't understand there were boundaries, right? That's
I don't belong here. Well, I'm here.
So at the end of the day, but it takes that kind of thought process almost, because that's what it takes to look beyond your world, right?
Sure.
And whether or not you're willing to go act on those things or just talk about those things, I think it's in everybody's best interest to look at it, right? Just to think of what's beyond, right? So anyway, going back to the question at hand, which is, how do people go and act that? One is like I said, a leader that allows that to happen, just saying, hey, let's go try something different and be okay to fail, be okay to see that change. It is absolutely how do you drive engagement, right? Of making it okay for people to go do that and measuring. And then maybe the final piece, almost back to Adam McKinnis's point earlier, right? Around, how do you educate people of what else there could be? In our space, we talk to people all the time about, doing site visits or going looking at other things. Our group gets the benefit of going across a lot of different organizations and seeing all the different things, but we forget sometimes that when we go into an environment, people don't always have that same perspective. So they haven't seen this job performed differently or this task done differently. So as a leader, one of the things I think people might be interested in is just get them educated. Let them see the world of possibilities, right? Yeah. Because naturally people start gravitating towards, hey, there might be a better idea. But it is an educational process as much as anything, right?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we've got 3, 4, 30-year vets on the on the call here today. But Chris, we've worked with a 34-year vet, at one of our clients, but his 34 years was in the same building, from loading trucks to running the facility. And so where he brought a lot of value, or rather brought a lot of value to the organization, his understanding of what the art of the possible was just wasn't there, right? And so I think he would have benefited from having done something else or having been exposed to the art of the possible.
Yeah. So our buddy Ron Burrell out there says culture change come from the top, right? People believe that leaders actually do more than what they say, and that is absolutely true, right? But I think
seems like good advice for Chris. Yeah, I'm just saying.
I think everybody knows exactly what I do. So, which isn't a good thing, just for all right, so we're about out of time here. You guys have any other parting comments that you want to contribute?
Now, and share, leave your comments below.
Right.
That's what I'll say.
Yeah. And right. Andy was the one that put the dig on you, not me. So,
all right. Well, it'll come up later. So, special thanks to Pete for filling in at the last minute.
Pete.
Yeah, thank you for that. Appreciate everybody who's participated and is listening. And as any good show, I'm going to end this with an apology. We're sorry this sucked. We hope to still get better at this, following our suck less mantra. But at the end of the day, change is hard for folks, and no matter what it is, there are absolutely some cultural impacts, some metrics impacts, some just educational components to think about before you try to enter into any type of change management process. You have to create the demand to go drink the water before you can make anybody drink the water, right? They've got to be thirsty first, right?
Yep.
So anything you can do to make that better and create that environment is going to help them. So I appreciate everybody's time today and comments, and look forward to the next show.